He looked at the pregnancy test in my hands, smiled, and never came back. That night, I lost my boyfriend, but over the next 3 years, I would discover a strength I didn't even know existed. This is the story of how the worst day of my life became the beginning of the best version of myself. I held the test for too long, the dim bathroom light making the second line look like a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost. It was a small, blue, impossible truth trembling in my hands. Joy came first, a hot, stupid rush of naive hope. I thought about us. I thought about our small apartment, the cold nights that would now have a purpose, the plans scribbled on cafe napkins. I thought about us. And that was my first big mistake. He was in the living room, shirt unbuttoned, bare feet on the cold rug. My heart was pounding with that euphoria only total vulnerability allows. I didn't say anything at first. I just held out the test, the irrefutable proof that our story no longer belonged to just the two of us. Now we were 3. He looked at the object, then at me, and what I expected to be a mirror of my joy, or at least shock mixed with tenderness, turned into something slow and cold. He smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind of nervous twitch people use to mask panic. "Is this serious?" he murmured. His voice was a whisper, and that sudden silence hit me before the words did. The silence was an omen. I tried to stay enthusiastic. I talked about names, about how we'd be a family. And as I spoke, his smile dissolved. His face, usually so open and expressive, became a mask of ash and blue. The truth came in a single, dry, remorseless sentence. "I can't do this, Maya. Not we can't. Not this wasn't in the plans. Just, I can't." On instant, my world, which had expanded to include the universe of a baby, imploded on itself. The room grew darker, the air thicker. I felt the weight of social judgment and the fear of abandonment that my life's story already seemed to predict. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, not right away. Shock is a powerful anesthetic. I just watched as he got dressed, a cold, mechanical movement, as if he were preparing to go out for milk and never come back. I watched him grab his wallet and keys. He didn't look at the test, or at my belly still flat, but already holding a future. He looked at a point above my head, at the wall, at the void he was about to create. "I need to think," he said, but it was a lie. There was no thought, only flight. "I'll be back tomorrow." And then the door slammed, a dry, final sound that sealed our story. That sound is the soundtrack of all abandonment, a brutal and irreversible closure. I waited all night. The next morning, his side of the bed was cold and untouched. His toothbrush was gone. His clothes were gone from the closet. His silence had transformed into an empty space. He didn't come back the next day. He disappeared that same night. He left behind only my pregnancy test on the dresser and the certainty that the word us was now just me. I was a single mother before my baby even had the chance to be born. If this moment hits you, pause for a second. Tap like and write, "I'm here" in the comment. Your voice reminds me I'm not telling this story alone. The pain of abandonment was an open wound, but I soon discovered that social stigma was an acid dripping on it, slowly and constantly. The news of my pregnancy, inevitably, began to spread. I tried to keep it a secret, wearing baggy clothes, avoiding gatherings. But you can't hide an entire life inside you. The truth has a way of showing itself not just in the body, but in the eyes. My friends, the ones I had imagined would be aunts and godmothers, began to pull away. At first, it was flimsy excuses, too busy, another commitment. Soon, the silence became deafening. They saw me as a symbol of failure, as living proof that the fairy tale life didn't exist. I heard them in hushed conversations, their judgment masked as concern. Poor Maya. What is she going to do? What they really meant was, how could she be so irresponsible? How will she carry this shame? The harshest rejection, however, came from home. My parents, People of rigid principles saw my condition not as a challenge, but as a stain on the family's reputation. The first conversation was a monologue of disappointment. My father stared at the floor, unable to look at my belly, which wasn't even showing but already represented chaos. My mother cried, not for me, but for the loss of the ideal life she had planned for her daughter. They feared the judgment of the church, the neighbors, the colleagues. Why didn't you think about the consequences, Maya? That question, repeated to exhaustion, echoed the silent prejudice of a society that marginalizes single mothers. Society tells us to succeed, to be strong, but when we fail the traditional family structure, we are immediately relegated to the category of social failure. I moved back into my parents' house, not for emotional support, but out of financial necessity. The financial hardship was a new layer of stress. My salary barely covered the bills for one apartment, let alone the cost of a baby's future. My parents' help came with the weight of every disapproving glance, every heavy sigh. I was an unwanted guest, a constant reminder of an unconfessed mistake. I used to walk at night, when the world was asleep and the ghost of rejection couldn't see me. I'd cover my stomach with a coat, as if I could protect my child from the social shame I carried. But the weight was real. I saw couples on the street and felt a sharp envy, not for their love, but for the simplicity of their arrangement. They had an us. I only had a me, and the promise of a little you who was on the way. On one particularly dark day, in my 3rd month, I was in the supermarket and ran into an old high school classmate. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my midsection, and made a casual comment that hit me like a punch. You were always so ambitious, Maya. It's such a shame. Things changed. There was no malice. There was pity. And pity, I discovered, is so much worse than anger. The loneliness wasn't just physical, it was a barrier separating me from the normal world, the world that didn't have to fight against stigma. I was living the heartbreak part of the story and felt I needed to find the strength. It was my silent fight against the narrative society wanted to write for me. That of a broken, abandoned woman. Didn't want to be that story. I needed a turning point. I was in the waiting room, bladder aching, heart tight. There was no one with me, no hand to hold, no voice to share the nervous anticipation. Silence was my only companion. I felt like the epitome of loneliness and motherhood, a living portrait of the abandonment society fears so much. When the nurse called my name, I felt like I was walking into a courtroom where the verdict on my new life would be announced. I lay down on the cold table. The gynecologist, a middle-aged woman with tired but kind eyes, barely looked at me. She just applied the cold gel to my belly. The room lights were dimmed, leaving only the bluish glow of the monitor. I was just expecting a diagnosis, a medical confirmation of my condition. What happened was a catharsis. The one slid, and suddenly, the monitor, once black, filled with a vibrant gray blur. The gynecologist pointed to a tiny spot. There it is, she said, her voice routine. The heart is beating fast. You're 11 weeks. I saw it. I saw the tiny, rapid pulse, the outline of a future, the miracle I had stubbornly carried through judgment and rejection. In that instant, the pain of abandonment, the weight of stigma, the financial difficulties, it all dissolved. It was no longer about him being gone. It was about this being here. The tears I had held back for weeks finally came, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were a wave of pure, fierce love. That tiny dot blinking on the dark screen was my unexpected turn. It was physical proof that I was not alone. I closed my eyes and felt the umbilical connection establish itself, not just physically, but spiritually. That tiny being became my focal point, the reason for everything. I whispered, not knowing if the doctor could hear. I promise you, I will fight. We will win. And the promise I made to my child became my narrative contract with life. When the gynecologist handed me the ultrasound photo, it was the most precious thing I had ever owned. I tucked it into my wallet, a constant reminder that my body was no longer a source of shame, but a sanctuary of strength. From that day on, my body, my life, my work, everything had a new purpose. The protection and care of that tiny heart. My perspective shifted from I can do this. His cowardly phrase too, "I must do this." Fear gave way to unbreakable determination. The social stigma was still there, but it seemed smaller, distant. They could judge the single mother, but they couldn't touch the warrior being born inside me. Leaving the clinic, I felt taller, steadier. My walk was different. I wasn't hiding my belly anymore. I was carrying it. The initial pain had transformed into the invisible strength needed for a new beginning. The dark image from the ultrasound was my brightest light. Loneliness had been replaced by an inseparable pair. Nights were the hardest part. Not the physical exhaustion of pregnancy, but the soul's sleeplessness. My room in my parents' house was both a forced refuge and a prison. It was there, in the silence of the early hours, that I tried again and again to stitch together the unfinished story I'd been left with. I began writing letters. Unsent letters that were, in truth, brutal, low-cost therapy sessions. I'd take a notepad and write to him, the absent father, the ghost. The first letter was pure rage. I poured out all the pain of abandonment, the shock of that silent night, the cowardice of his escape. I blamed him for my stigma, for the loneliness of motherhood, for the humiliation of facing the world with the truth. I was left behind. I asked, how could you leave and steal not only my partner but the father of our child before he even had the chance to breathe? The second letter was a plea for understanding. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe the pressure was too much. I tried to find an excuse for his weakness, searching for the humanity he had thrown away. Pathetic. Really imagining myself trying to convince him we could still be a family, even knowing trust was irreparably broken. I begged, can't you see what you've lost? Don't you miss our life, your future? I tore that one up. I didn't need pity, and he didn't deserve justification. The third and longest letter was a broken prayer. It wasn't addressed to him, but to a God who seemed to have forgotten me. I wrestled with forgiveness. Deeping my soul, I knew that to move forward, I had to let him go. But how do you forgive someone who inflicted such deep emotional pain, who condemned my son to a life without a father, who forced me to become an invisible hero before my time? Acceptance came at dawn, after hours staring at the ultrasound photo. I realized that forgiving wasn't about setting him free from his mistake. It was about freeing myself from the bitterness that kept him alive in my mind. Anger was an anchor, keeping me from swimming. I gathered all the letters, placed them in a metal bowl in the backyard under the cold sky, and burned them. It wasn't a ritual of hate, it was a silent release. As the paper turned to ash, I felt the emotional weight lift. In that moment, I finally accepted my new reality. I was officially a single mother, and my invisible strength would not come from a partner, or from society's or my family's approval. It would come from within, from the determination to turn abandonment into power. And I discovered that the universe doesn't operate in a vacuum. When you close yourself off from one person, somehow it opens a door to another. My loneliness had made me invisible to many, but to a few, it made me vulnerable. And that vulnerability was a silent call. The unexpected hand came in the form of Elena. She was an older woman who worked at my office, a middle-aged manager with a reputation for being reserved and somewhat stern. We'd never exchanged more than polite greetings. One day, I was in the break room. Trying to heat up a cheap soup. Money was tight, and financial struggle was my daily companion when I started crying quietly. Not sobbing, just that cold, desperate dripping that gets stuck in your throat. Elena walked in. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched me. I braced myself for the usual judgment, for pity or disapproval, but she simply handed me a tissue and a glass of water. "Your ex," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "His last name's Martin, right?" I nodded, confused. "I knew him," she continued. 15 years ago. He didn't just run away from you, dear. He ran away from me too." The shock hit me like an electric current. He had a pattern. I wasn't the first. Her story was almost identical to mine. Promises of love, the shock of pregnancy, and disappearance on the same night. Elena, like me, was a single mother, an invisible heroine who had walked my exact path years earlier. That was the turning point I needed. Suddenly, my pain wasn't just mine. It was a shared story, a chapter in the infinite anthology of single mothers. I wasn't a failure. I was part of a movement of courage. The loneliness broke. Elena offered more than advice. She offered identification and acceptance. She became my mentor, my confidant, the empathetic, motherly voice everyone needs at least once. She told me, his abandonment doesn't define who you are. It defines who he is. And you, my azure, turning pain into strength. The hope Elena gave me was fuel, but routine was a long, bumpy, exhausting dirt road. My pregnancy advanced, and with it, the silent daily battle intensified. I wasn't just carrying a baby, I was carrying the weight of 2 lives, plus the stigma and abandonment forced upon me. I worked double shifts whenever I could. The fear of financial hardship was a stronger motivator than any coffee. There was one day, in my 7th month, that became the symbol of my struggle. I was coming home from work, my belly aching, ankles swollen. The bus was packed, and no one offered me a seat. I held on to the metal bar, head down. Suddenly, a wave of nausea and dizziness hit me. For a second, I thought I would faint right there, in the middle of that indifferent crowd. Desperation was palpable. A small voice in my head whispered, "You can't do this, Maya. Give up. It's too much for one person." And at that lowest point, right at the edge of my invisible strength, an unexpected turn happened. Not a miracle from outside, but from within. The baby kicked, not a soft flutter, but a strong, determined thump, as if to say, "I'm here. And there are 2 of us." That kick was my catharsis. It anchored me. Motherhood, lonely and unexpected, had forced me to discover a resilience I never knew I had. Labor began in the middle of the night, not with the cinematic drama of movies, but with a deep, rhythmic pain that felt almost familiar. It was the pain I had carried for months, the pain of abandonment, of judgment, of financial struggle, now transformed into a propelling force, pushing me toward a new beginning. Elena drove me to the hospital. Her presence was a balm, a reminder that the loneliness of motherhood could be broken through connection and understanding. Hours passed, dark and heavy with effort. I closed my eyes and focused on the small being fighting to enter the world. I repeated my broken prayer to myself. I am enough. We are enough. And then it happened. A sharp, high-pitched cry, the purest, most cathartic sound I had ever heard. They placed him on my chest. My son. The miracle. He was tiny, wrinkled, but perfect. His scent was the scent of the future. When I touched him, the fierce, protective love I had felt at the ultrasound exploded into overwhelming reality. All the pain disappeared. The void left by abandonment was filled with a flood of unconditional love. I was no longer the abandoned girl. I was a mother, and that word carried an invisible strength that transcended fear, shame, and rejection. 3 years passed. 3 years of silent struggle turned into power. My son, Leo, was my sunshine. I'd gone back to school, earned a promotion, and with Elena's help, turned our small life into a story of courage. Abandonment was no longer a wound, it was the scar that reminded me of my invisible strength. But fate loves a dramatic climax. We were at a sunny park. Leo was running, laughing. I was sitting on a bench, watching him, feeling the deep satisfaction of having built this future on my own. And then I saw him across the park, under the shade of an oak tree. There he was. Time had passed, but the figure was the same. His hair a little thinner, his clothes a little tighter. He was alone, staring into the distance, carrying a weight I had let go of long ago. The ghost had returned. Our eyes met. The shock was instant, a deafening silence that froze the park. He looked visibly shaken. My heart, once frantic for him, stayed.com. I had a new armor. He walked toward me, hesitant, each step slow and heavy. "Maya," he whispered. His voice was a faint echo of that night of great silence. "Hello, Martin," I replied with a steadiness that surprised even me. He looked at Leo, who was now running back toward my arms. The child stopped, curious. "Who's the boy?" he asked, his voice breaking. This was the final revelation, the moment that would seal our fate. "This is Leo," I said plainly. "My son?" The one you couldn't handle. His face twisted. He tried to reach for Leo, but I leaned back, creating a protective barrier. I came back, he said quickly, desperately. I made a terrible mistake. I've thought about it so much. I want to fix this. I want to be part of his life. He seemed to expect my old shame, my fear of abandonment, to make me say yes. He was looking for the victim, but he found the invisible heroine who had turned pain into power. I smiled a cold, final smile. Too late? Martin! Your chance ended the night you left. I looked at Leo, then back at him. Leo doesn't need someone trying to fix the past. He needed someone there, and that person is me. He talked about money, about how much he'd missed us, about his loneliness. But I wasn't listening anymore. The stigma was never Manit, was his, the man who ran from his own flesh and blood. Go, Martin, I said, standing and taking Leo's hand. Our story is about strength, and your part in it was being the obstacle that showed me how strong I am. Go. I walked away, Leo laughing and squeezing my hand. There was no sadness, no anger, only an immense sense of peace. Poetic justice wasn't revenge, it was my choice to be happy without him. The greatest gift his abandonment gave me was Zanti, my son. It was the courage to be enough on my own. When he returned, the real surprise wasn't seeing him, it was realizing I didn't need him. His rejection, ironically, forced me to find the invisible strength I'd always longed for. The emotional catharsis was complete. Pain had been transformed into power. To all the women fighting alone, carrying the weight of judgment and abandonment, know this: your strength doesn't come from who stayed. It comes from who you became when you had to fight alone. Abandonment doesn't define you. It defines the one who left. And you are the heroine of your own story. Sometimes, the greatest gift someone can give you is letting you discover. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and share this video with someone who needs strength today. You never know whose life you might change with a single message.